to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Josh Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm so happy to have you here. I'm honored. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thanks for asking. I love doing these things.
Yeah.
Especially during COVID where you don't see people.
I know, right?
Very much.
Exactly. Are you guys in person or are you just virtual now?
We're virtual.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I saw on your Instagram that you are a U2 fan.
Huge.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Dude, I'll tell you what, man. A few of their songs is like, it's hard to get better music. You know what I mean?
agree.
It's hard to get more transcendent, I feel like.
I agree. Have you seen them live?
No, I haven't. And I'm not like a hardcore U2 fan necessarily, other than many times I'll just play U2 Essentials. Like just go down there. I mean, that's one of my favorite playlists.
Yeah.
Where the Streets Have No Name. Oh my goodness. What are some of your favorite songs?
Gosh, I love. It's funny. I have certain eras that I get stuck in.
Okay.
And the thing I love about them as a band, it's just from the first record in 1980 to their latest record, they keep reinventing themselves.
Okay.
When there's sort of like a rut, they do like Octung Baby right after Joshua Tree. Then there was Octung Baby, and then there was Pop and Zeropa. So it just depends on the era.
Okay.
It's almost like asking which one of my kids are my favorite.
Right.
Right. I love them all. I don't know how to pick one. Songs live. Like I love hearing With or Without You live.
Okay. Yes.
It's one of my favorites.
You have heard With or Without You live?
Many times. Yeah.
Many times?
Yeah.
Where and when?
I've seen them here in Nashville. I've seen them in Louisville.
How long ago in Nashville?
2 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. Now that tour they didn't do. So it was the Experience tour.
Okay.
And they just finished the Joshua Tree 30th anniversary. So they didn't play any Joshua Tree songs.
Yep.
Which was odd because every time I've seen them, they've played.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw them in Atlanta back when Atomic Bomb came out.
Okay.
And that was a pretty incredible show.
Wow, I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, you talk about a transcendent experience. Somehow they create that, right?
Yeah.
At every concert I've been to, they create that. And the last one I took my oldest son to, we did some work with the One campaign.
Okay.
And then we got to sit behind the soundboard area. And
you got to sit behind the soundboard area?
Yeah, the soundboard was like right here, and they put all of us volunteers behind it.
Oh, okay.
It was,
gotcha.
And it was his very first concert. And I was like, buddy, it's all downhill.
How old was your son?
Let's see, 2 years. So he's almost 11. So he'd have been about 9.
Eight or 9. That's like
yeah.
Lincoln's age. He's my oldest now. He's 10. And to go to a U2 concert with him together, oh, my word. Yeah. What a memory.
Yeah,
I mean, he'll probably remember that the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think so.
I guess it depends on how many more concerts he goes to.
That's right. He's not going to find a better band, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, I'm excited to have you, man. So like we talked about, I love to talk through progressive Christianity. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Richard Rohr, which probably ties in with the first. And then I'd love to hear more about the transgender movement. I mean, it's not something I know I'm an expert in. Let's put it that way. But first, a caveat. I go to CrossFit here at CrossFit Forte, just up the road, and I go to the 11:30 class. And there's every Thursday we do like, are you in or you out? And whoever's in puts $5 in a hat. Then you pick a partner out of the hat. And I did that today, and I should not have. And it was a long workout, and it was hard. And I came back like 45 minutes ago with a major case of CrossFit brain. So I don't know what we're gonna get here, man.
That's all right, man.
So I think we'll be fine. I think we'll get through it. But I got a major brain fog. I mean, if you working out like that, it's okay if you like push it like 80 to 85%, but if you push it like 90 to 95% for 35 minutes, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to do that again. So the next time those guys like, you in or you out, 45 minutes for an hour before a podcast, I'm out. I can't.
No shame.
Yeah,
Just
no
out.
shame. I'm out. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about who you are and how you got to be pastor at Grace Point. It sounds like you have a kid that's 11 or
I got
11.
a lot of kids.
Do you really?
Yeah.
You look like you are. I'm going to guess, like you look like you're 24 years old, but I suspect you're not.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
You look really young.
I'll be 40 next year.
No
joke.
Dude, there's no way.
Promise. Yeah.
You're 39 years old right now.
I'm 39 years old.
40 next year.
Yeah.
Dang.
So we have
36, but you must hear this a lot.
Sometimes, not as much lately.
You look very young.
Not as much lately, but I have heard that most of my life. It was actually one of those things where people, of course, when I've been in ministry, pastoring, preaching, whatever, for 20 years now.
Wow.
And when I first started, people were like, "What are you, 12?" Like, you
Really?
don't get to, yeah. So it used to drive me nuts, and now I'm like, 24? Yes.
Yeah.
Please don't. If I get carded, like,
Yeah.
order a drink, and they're like, I need to see your ID. I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Did you ever grow a beard or anything?
I have tried a couple times.
Okay.
It's not great. Like,
Okay.
I can really grow it right here.
Okay.
The sides, though, look really sad.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can grow a pretty serious beard, and I think I probably look like I'm 47 years old when I grow a beard. I mean, a beard, like a full beard, I think can make like any guy look like 10 years older than he is, you know?
And mine has gray in it.
Yeah, mine
in
too.
Spots, so,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So who's Josh, and how'd you get here?
Gosh, so I grew up. I'm from sort of the eastern Kentucky, West Virginia coal fields. That's where I grew up. I grew up in a family where my grandfather was a Free Will Baptist preacher, and when he died when I was 11, and that was sort of so that would have been 93. And I lost him and his mom both the same year, and they were my two people. So when I talk about whatever unraveling my faith did, that actually started then.
You said your grandfather and his mom died?
Within 6 months of each other.
So you knew your great-grandma?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
She was in her 80s when she passed. But I was really fortunate. She lived next door to us. I spent a ton of time with her as a kid.
Wow, that's with your great-grandmother?
Yeah, with my great-grandmother. And so, and my grandfather, it's the craziest story. He died during a church business meeting while a person had just said to him, "You're the problem and you need to go." And he dies. No joke. Yeah, you can't script that. And
in 93?
93.
Dude, that is the most outlandish thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
like a family. What do we used to call them? Members meeting, almost like a members
sort of
meeting, like a business meeting, like not on a Sunday morning service.
No, it was a Sunday night. Saturday. It was a Saturday night. They always did their business meetings on Saturday night.
And someone said to your grandfather, "You're the problem," and he died.
Yeah.
From what?
Massive heart attack. And he had looking back on it as a kid, he had. When he was a very small child, he had rheumatic fever and it damaged his heart. So he had heart problems. Mm-hmm. He had a really serious bypass surgery a couple years before that. But at 11 years old or whatever I was, that there was no logic there. Mm-hmm. It was literally in my brain, church will kill you.
Yeah.
Which is why when I stumbled into this gig of being a pastor, it was like the last thing that I wanted to do with my life because I felt like it had taken so much already.
Wow.
But here I am, and 20 years in, I found out I was right about that in some ways.
Yeah.
Church will take a lot out of you.
Yeah.
But it also it's been a gift to, and I also do so knowing that everything I believe right now, my grandfather would disapprove of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, theologically.
Okay.
The sort of the solace I take is his thing was he wanted to just pursue truth.
Okay.
And tell the truth that he had discovered. And I feel like that's what I've tried to do with my life too. Mm-hmm. So I feel like we share that.
Sure. You share that passion or that calling.
Yeah. We just
sense of calling, yeah.
would disagree on what the truth might be.
And how about your dad? Was he in the ministry too?
Nope.
No.
Okay. So this was my maternal grandfather. My dad is retired from the railroad. He was a railroad engineer.
Okay.
He and his dad both drove trains.
Okay. So did you sense a call to ministry at a young age then? It sounded like you had a fairly young start if you've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah. So trying to remember. So I was probably 16 or 17. And so do you know much about the Enneagram?
A little bit, yeah. I have a book over here. My brain. So this is the Christian Enneagram something. Actually, I think Richard Rohr might have been part of writing that book over there. That was my first introduction. Someone recommended that book a few years ago, and yes, I know about the Enneagram. I think I'm a 3, and I forget my wing is and stuff. I don't follow it super closely, but I know a little bit about it. Yeah,
it's helped me describe myself to the world. I'm a 7.
Okay.
But what's interesting is I don't know that I've always been a 7. As a kid, I was very shy, introverted, didn't really want to be in front of people. And so when I was about 16 or 17 at our church, we'd gone to a Southern Baptist church. We went liberal. is the way a lot of people saw it. We left the Free Will Baptists to go to
the Southern Baptist,
the left-wing Southern Baptist Church. Yeah, the left-wing Baptists. And
isn't that something? Like, it's all about perspective, right?
It is all about perspective.
Yeah.
And the way this happened, I ended up sort of being a leader in the youth group, even though I didn't know that. But the music minister came to me one day and he said, "We're doing a youth service in 2 weeks on a Sunday night, and the pastor's going to be out of town. Would you do a little sermon devotional thing?" And I was torn between this. I have this deep-seated need to please people sometimes, so I said yes immediately. And then I was like, "Oh God, what have I done?"
Yeah.
And just started praying that maybe I would get a stomach virus or something that would knock me out of having to do this. And I actually was pretty healthy. And so I ended up, and I'll never forget, I gave this 11-minute sermon, and I know people probably, wish I was still giving 11-minute sermons, but
right.
I gave this 11-minute sermon on John 3:16, and I would totally not say any of it the way that I said it then today.
Yeah.
But there's a moment at the end of it where I was just like, I don't know what just happened, but I think I need to do that again.
Oh, wow.
And then I just got on the circuit. I call it the circuit. There are like 400 small Baptist churches without pastors in the area where I grew up.
In Kentucky?
Well, 400 is an exaggeration.
Sure.
There were a lot.
Okay.
I come from the place where there's a holler, there's multiple hollers, and all of them have their own churches. And so I would just start going to people's churches without pastors. My pastor got me on this circuit, and I would preach some really terrible sermons.
Now, what do you mean a church without a pastor? I don't feel like I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, so
is this a Baptist thing?
Yeah,
or?
so especially in the Baptist world where you don't, it's like there's no, like if you're in a mainline church, for example, or there's you're Methodist. There's a way you go about becoming a Methodist pastor, right? Like
okay, sure.
That doesn't exist within what makes you an expert or a preacher is you're like, hey, I'll do that.
Oh, I see.
It's not a great system.
Sure.
Because, there's no quality control.
Right.
You just go out and do your thing. But I would go to these churches that were searching for pastors and or that they had a pastor who's on vacation and he needs somebody to fill in.
Okay.
And I just would preach anywhere. I took every opportunity, always said yes, and showed up and got in some really awkward, painful situations.
I'm sure. Are you, low 20s at this point?
I was not even 20 yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was 17, 18.
No kidding. Mm-hmm. And this is like Sunday morning or this is Sunday night type stuff? Both.
Yeah, whatever I could get.
Wow. And the denomination or the tradition is at this point Southern Baptist, or is it the Free Will Baptist?
Southern Baptist.
It's Southern Baptist. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. When you say your grandfather... Oh, well, let me just hear more about that. So at some point, you had some kids and all of this. So kind of bring us from that point then forward.
So when I was 23, I took a job at a church in rural Kentucky in a place called Morgantown, which is a little bit north of Bowling Green. I don't know if Bowling Green's familiar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was 23. It was sort of the church at the time was a member of the Willow Creek Association, so that kind of gives you sort of an understanding of purpose-driven.
Bill Hybels Church?
Yes. So it was some marriage of the Willow model with the Rick Warren purpose-driven.
I see.
Basically, it was a small evangelical church that dreamed of being a megachurch.
Okay.
Right? That was what every evangelical church dreams of being. And so I took that job when I was 23. And when I took that job, I met my wife there. And then we're a foster adoptive family. So
cool.
we've adopted all 5 of our children.
Oh, wow.
And so the first one, I was 28 when our first was born. And we got to name him, go to the hospital, the whole deal. And then, so we have him. He'll be 11. We have a pair of twins who are going to be 5. They have a biological sibling who we also have adopted who's going to be 4. And then we have another little girl who is going to be 5 next summer. So I have 11, 5, 5, 5, and 4.
Bro.
Basically. Yeah.
You are an intense season of life. I have 5 kids, but they're all 2 years apart. They're every 2 years from 10 down, basically.
Yeah.
But having basically 3 4 in that 5 and 4 year, 5 and 4 and 3-year-old stage. Dude, that is intense, man.
We're almost potty trained now, so that
the whole family.
Yeah. I'm still working on it. But,
right.
Yeah, and also all of our kids except for our oldest have some sort of special need, and I'll just tell you they're incredible. Like it's frustrating. Being a parent can be really frustrating, and especially when our oldest is. There is not a possible way a human being could be more like another human being than he is me.
Really?
So it's like dealing with myself.
That's how me and my oldest are too.
Yeah. But I never imagined how much I would learn from our kids just on a daily, consistent basis of them just being them. It's shaped how I approach everything.
How long were you married before you adopted your first? A few years?
4 or 5 years.
Okay, yeah. We were married for 4 or 5 years before we started having kids as well. And when you say special needs, what kind of special needs do your kids have?
One of our kiddos is autistic.
Okay.
We have.
Is he or he or she?
She.
Communicative?
Much more than we expect, and it's getting better. Which is.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
oh great.
Yeah, the therapy has been a wonderful thing for her.
Okay.
One of our daughters has spina bifida.
Is that what is that?
So essentially, when she was born, she had an opening, and if my wife were here, she could give you all the details about it.
Yeah.
But essentially, for her, it means that she doesn't really have feeling from like her kneecaps down.
I see.
But she's got a wheelchair. We call it her wheels, and she's also working with some braces and things. So I think her experience in the world will be partly how hard she wants to work for whatever she wants,
really?
right? Like she may be able to like she's starting to cruise, which is great.
Okay.
Just pull up on stuff, and she loves to announce that she's doing it so that you'll clap for her.
Okay. How old is she?
She will be 5 next year.
Okay. And when you say she's starting to cruise, do you just mean she's starting to walk if she can hold on to like a tabletop or something?
Yeah, like so we'll get on the couch and pull up and then just sidestep over.
Cool.
And it's,
Okay.
Yeah, it's really neat to watch.
Yeah. Just the two that are special needs?
No, well, we also, 2 of our kids have fetal alcohol syndrome as well.
Okay.
And then our youngest son has some still yet to be sorted out stuff.
Yep.
We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like for him.
And then fetal alcohol syndrome, is that just what it sounds like? The
Yeah.
birth parents just drank a ton of alcohol?
Yeah. I don't know the amount, but any is problematic. And so, yeah.
And is that something where like I don't know much about that. So like if you're pregnant and you drink a lot of alcohol while you're pregnant, something about that can kind of pass to the baby.
It can affect
and then affect the development and stuff of the baby while it's in the womb.
Yeah, and our two kiddos that have that diagnosis, it affects them differently. It's not exactly. It isn't like a carbon copy thing. They both have their own sort of things that experience them.
That's we've talked about drug laws on here before, and cannabis in particular as it becomes legalized in other states and stuff. Like, maybe there's a infant cannabis syndrome that I have not heard of before. And I know you can do damage. Of course, you can do damage to kids with tons of drugs, right? But
sure.
The fact that alcohol is legal, it's just so devastating. Like, the legalization of alcohol is the best argument for the legalization of lots of other drugs as well, in my opinion. If we're still functioning as a society with alcohol being on every street corner, we can handle cannabis and probably a whole handful of other drugs. But that's just my personal opinion.
It seems weird to me that in almost 21, it makes total sense to me that they've decriminalized marijuana
in lots of states.
Colorado
apparently Oregon apparently pretty much everything is legal, which I don't even know that much about. Oh yeah, didn't you know that? This happened apparently on election day. I don't really know a lot about where these drug laws change and how and when you vote and those types of things. So it wasn't really on my radar. But yeah, you can go to Oregon right now. My understanding is and do crack and it's totally legal. Yeah, so they're like going. It'll be interesting to follow that. And I think mushrooms are legal in. I think they were decriminalized in Colorado and other states as well. So it's fast. That's one of the interesting things about like the United States of America is you can have state laws be different from each other and see kind of what works and what doesn't. We can follow Colorado or Oregon and see how that works out for them. And Tennessee should pay attention. And if it's a very bad thing to make cannabis legal, then, well, maybe we don't want to do it too. If there's no downside and there's an upside, then why wouldn't we?
It's one of those things too. It seems like, especially with like marijuana, making it illegal. It's not like people aren't getting it.
100%.
It's just that also it's then. I mean, you have people who are serving sentences for marijuana possession, and people who are like killing people and serving less time.
Yes,
which is not a thing I understand.
Yep. It just gets so political. I mean, and race gets involved too, like racial motivations from people in power gets involved with these laws. It's pretty absurd when you just kind of step back and look where we're at today with the laws around some of these. Even calling it a drug is pretty ridiculous in my opinion. But we're getting off topic.
I can go wherever.
Yeah. Is this all right? So adopting these kids with special needs is something you wanted to do, or something your wife wanted to do, or something you guys wanted to do together? I mean, this is a commitment, man. I mean, obviously you know way more than I do, but I'm just I'm impressed and encouraged by like people like you that have a heart for that. So
we both, when we got married, we decided that that's the direction we wanted to go. We wanted to adopt, and so that process for us was, I mean, it was never like we knew exactly what we were getting into. Mm-hmm. It was, you get a phone call from the cabinet who says, hey, we have a couple kiddos. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of always thought we'll have 2 kids.
Oh, yeah?
And then just the way things played out over time, we ended up with a little more than that.
You thought you were going to have 2 and you have 5?
Yeah.
Are you done? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just actually celebrated the final adoption of 3 of our kiddos in October.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And then my wife said, well, maybe when they're grown, we can maybe just foster some teenagers or something. And I said, when they're grown, I'm going to be like 60-something.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Somebody else, we're going to let them
step in.
Yeah. I'm done. I'm not going to, nope. I'll play with my grandkids if I have them. Otherwise, I think I'm done.
Yeah, I can respect that for sure. So how long you been married then?
Gosh, it'll be, next year should be 16 years, I think.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a while. We've been married for 14 years. Time goes by so quick.
I don't feel like I'm old enough to have done anything for 16, 20 years.
I feel the same way, man. I mean, sometimes I look at my 10-year-old and I'm like, how is this? How do we get here? How are you so big? You know what I mean? Like that. I remember having you. I remember when you were born. And then I remember, when you were in awesome bang, you're this young man. It's crazy. Time just keeps going, man. It's so merciless that way,
Whether you're ready or not.
It really is.
Yeah.
So you, man, you're a very kind of non-traditional family, particularly being born and raised in Kentucky, in Free Will Baptist circles, then Southern Baptist circles, and then now kind of as where you are in Nashville. And I mean, this is, do you feel like you and your wife have always kind of had that kind of security or kind of inner strength to be different and just be okay with that? Or is it very hard? Because I'm assuming maybe not all of your family, even to this day, would believe what you believe. Does that cause difficulty, or do they?
So my wife's parents, her mom and stepdad, have been on the journey with us. So my family they don't agree with, no, they don't agree with me at all. I'm an only child.
Okay.
I have a good relationship with my parents.
Okay.
We just don't talk about my work or theology or anything like that. We talk about football and the kids and those kind of things. The rest of my family sort of, no, they don't. And you know how it is, like I've had to dodge interventions a couple times, theological interventions.
Oh, really?
And yeah. So I really don't have, as far as relationships, I have one with my parents mainly. Mm-hmm. And I see my other family, most of my family on my side lives down in Spring Hill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see them usually like at Thanksgiving, but that obviously didn't happen this year.
Yeah.
So no, we don't share a lot theologically on my side of the of the family.
And is that just something where it's sort of okay if you don't get into those discussions, and it's just better not to have those discussions? Is that kind of how you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, ish. I think for me, like I'm open to talking about anything.
Yeah.
I know that I'm sure some of my family worries about the state of my eternal soul, which I can just tell them I feel fine. I feel really at peace with where I am. And there's just sort of I don't know where I came from in the sense of being naturally sort of, I don't want to say led, but naturally questions have always been like asking questions, not taking things at face value, or was something that I started doing at a very young age.
Oh, okay.
But also not saying it out loud.
Okay.
Because you say it out loud, then people start to question your faith. There's
Sure.
a problem with your faith. There's a problem with, you're just wanting to do what's. My favorite thing is when people have accused me of becoming progressive for the money.
I assume that's probably not the case.
No.
Like if you were after money, going progressive is probably not the direction you take.
I do not recommend that if you're in it for the money.
Say, yeah.
But yeah, so it's one of those things. If I'm around my family, it's okay. It's hard when you can't talk it. Like my work is a massive chunk of who I am. It's not like one of those jobs where I go and I do something for 8 hours and I punch the clock and then it's a massive part
of calling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So not being able to talk about that in full is challenging. But also, when it comes to my parents, I love my parents. They've always been great to me. They're really good people. And I can't imagine not having a relationship with them. So we just don't.
What denomination or kind of theological tradition are your parents?
Still the same. I think they would probably say Southern Baptist with a mix of Free Will Baptist in there.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you something about your family then in Nashville. Oh, yeah, this is what it was. I didn't realize until this morning that is, now this may have changed with COVID and everything, but I believe, is Grace Point still on Charlotte Avenue?
No.
Okay, how long ago was it on Charlotte Avenue? Because that's very close to Emmanuel, Nashville, where I go to church, and Andrew as well.
Okay.
And I realized it's like we could have walked back and forth to these churches at some point, right?
Yeah. So
I didn't even know that.
We lost our space. We haven't met in person since March.
Okay.
We lost the space in September.
Oh, okay.
And we're currently looking at a couple places.
Okay.
We wouldn't be back in person yet anyway.
Sure.
But we're excited to find the spot where we will.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping, as next year begins to, there seems to be some optimism in the world that these vaccines will make a difference next year.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to, I just keep telling people, I hope talking in front of people is like riding a bike. Because I haven't talked to people.
Oh,
I've talked to a camera in my kitchen for 9 months.
I'm sure that it is. Plus, you're still communicating and preaching and teaching to the camera. I'm sure it's very different than. I'm sure it feels very weird.
It did at first. I've kind of gotten used to it now.
Oh yeah.
There's just I think a good sermon is part prophetic, part pastoral, and part stand up. And you lose at least that sort of so much of what I would do in a sermon was dependent on what was happening in front of me. Like I had content, but I was feeling the room, and obviously you don't do that.
Right. Well, that's true. I mean, with communication, even just timing alone in communication in person is so important. I feel like with stand-up comedy, timing is so critical. I mean, we were watching a movie last night, and I forget what the scene was exactly about, but the timing in that scene was just nailed it. Dude, I couldn't stop laughing. It was but it was about the timing. What they said mattered too, but the timing of and so, I feel like Ray, our former senior and founding pastor of Emmanuel Nashville, is a gifted communicator, and that's one thing I always felt like he had a special knack for, is just timing. When to kind of let a point land and breathe, when to kind of move through. I mean, that's just, I admire, gifted communicators, man. I'd love to become a better communicator over time, but I think it's a gift, and then also you can improve. You can get better at it. I think we were virtual for a while too, and then we went back in person. I'm not exactly sure what the future is going to hold as cases kind of rise again. I don't think we're having discussions about going back virtual again, but who knows what will happen. But I know they had TJ was talking to a camera, and he had a picture of his wife and then another guy, and I think he was kind of getting the whatever his wife that represented a certain demographic, and then the other guy I think was a non-believer, and that represented another demographic. And I think having those pictures like just under the camera, like would remind him like those he's the people you're talking to.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to sort of I imagine it's harder to kind of have it's easier to keep that in mind when you're at a church and here's your people, right, and you're talking to them, and you might have some believers, some non-believers, like a whole mix here, but when it's virtual, you just don't have that. I think on your website though, I did see there was at one point though what looked like a really beautiful sanctuary, like high arched ceilings with like wood panel. Like, was that at Charlotte Avenue, or was that another location?
That was at Charlotte.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's an event space.
Okay. It looked to me like a really like a old church.
Yeah, it used to be a church, and now it's like a wedding venue.
Oh, I see.
And we were there for next April, will make 2 years for me at Grace Point, and they were there just a little before I came around.
Okay, gotcha. So you preached in there plenty then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. By the way, how tall are you? You are a tall gentleman.
I'll tell you, I change it every time because I'm not quite sure. I'm somewhere in the 6'7", 6'8" range.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Wow. That's. Do you have trouble with doorways?
I have trouble with lots of things.
You had an Instagram post that now I lost it. It was the one talking about progressive Christianity. Where was it? I had it saved, and now it's gone. Sorry. It was right here. All right, well, let's just jump in there. There was an Instagram post that you had that, oh, by the way, now that I'm on your Instagram page, I see you like Weller. Oh. You want some Buffalo Trace? I'll have some if you're good.
Yeah, I rarely turn down bourbon.
Okay, well, let's have some bourbon then. You want to pour us a little bit while I'm trying to find my way around your Instagram post? You did a good job on explaining on this post.
You probably shouldn't trust me to pour.
Here we go.
I'm very generous.
Okay.
Say when.
Just give me 30%, 20% of the bottle.
I don't even know what that. I don't do numbers.
Yeah, that's good. All right, sorry, man, I can't find it. Well, let's just jump in. Progressive Christianity. Here you go.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, how do you define what is progressive Christianity? What does that mean?
That's one of those things. I think depending on who's sitting in this chair, they would maybe talk about it a little differently. For me, when I talk about progressive Christianity, I mean two things. I mean, one, it's something that is radically Christian. And when I say radical, I mean that in the actual meaning of the word, which is back to the root. So when I think about Christian faith, I'm thinking I want to go back to the root as close as possible to understand the movement Jesus started and inspired and what that movement was about. So, we're Christian. Love Jesus, follow Jesus, read stories about Jesus, talk about Jesus. And then to be progressive for me, it means that we also carry with us this openness to learning and growing and changing as we have better information and experiences. One of the favorite stories of mine in the Bibles and the book of Acts, chapter 10, where Simon Peter has this vision. He's going to be sent to this guy, Cornelius, who's a Gentile. And Cornelius is going to want to experience the Jesus movement. And so Peter has this vision. They drop this sheet down. It's got all sorts of unclean animals. And the voice says, get up, kill, and eat. And it's God saying, hey, go hunting and kill something and eat it. And Peter's response is, oh, no. I've never touched an unclean thing.
Yes.
Which I love is like when God in the story is telling him, he's like, no, God.
Yeah.
Unlike you, I'm not unclean. I've never touched an unclean thing.
I never thought about that in that passage before. That's a good point.
And so the whole point of it is that it's not that these Gentiles were unclean and now God's saying they're okay. The point is they've never been. Like this purity, impurity, clean, unclean category has never actually been how God views the world. And the Simon Peter, representing the early Christian community, is being invited to take this step into I'm sure for him in that story, it must have felt like, is this a calling? I'm being called to move beyond something, or is this a temptation? And I'm being tempted to bail out on my Orthodox faith. And I think for me, there have been clear moments in my life where I feel like I've been in a situation where I'm being invited. I feel like I'm being invited to take a step in what seems to me like a different or new direction, but might just be what the Spirit has been pulling us towards all along. Mm-hmm. And so for me, being a progressive Christian means I'm a Christian in the way of Jesus, not an exclusivist, but I'm a Christian. And
what would be an exclusivist?
I don't think Christians are the only people who, whatever the afterlife is, if there's like all that stuff.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for me,
in other words, to put that very clearly, you would believe that yes, you are a Christian, but it's not so cut and dried that you being a Christian gets you into, say, heaven, and someone who would say, I don't know that I'm a Christian, I don't know what that is, and I don't care to learn more, they may also say get into heaven, or they may be in the same place as you, kind of in this afterlife, and maybe not go to this hell that is in the center of the earth, or wherever this hell is with fire that they get thrown in. Like, is that kind of an accurate description?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I would just say, depending on the day of the week where we talk about it, I can tell you what I think about or don't think about the afterlife. Mm-hmm. I just tend to hold those kind of things with mystery and say,
sure.
I don't know. I don't know what happens. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knows, because nobody's been there and definitively come back and said, hey, this is exactly it. Mm-hmm. I don't believe God's love is confined to one religious tradition. Mm-hmm. But for me, the way I would describe my relationship with Christianity is it's my mother tongue. Mm. I don't know how to be anything else.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like the Jesus stories and the Christian language has shaped my imagination, my journey, everything about it. And so I'm very passionately Christian. Mm-hmm. And I'm very passionately progressive in the sense that I think that to follow Jesus will lead us into ever-expanding understanding of... So when science comes out with something new, right, like they make a discovery, it doesn't threaten my faith.
Right.
Because my faith just goes, oh, there's something new. There's mm-hmm. something new that seems to be true, and if it's true, then we can embrace it, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of Christians that have almost a weird relationship between the Bible and science in a lot of ways. And I mean, first and foremost, the Bible is not a science textbook, right? I mean, it's right. The whole book points us to Christ. And so, I mean, in examples like creation, and some people are hardcore on creation must have happened, I don't know what they say, 6,000 or 8,000 years ago or whatever. I'm totally fine with that. I'm also open to the fact that this earth is billions of years old. Yep. I don't know that that's what the first few chapters in Genesis is really trying to most definitely convey. And I know there's lots of people who disagree with me on that,
Well, and I think that those early chapters of Genesis, right? Chapter 1, and then you have 2, 3, 4, which present two different creation stories with essentially things that happen in different orders. And what I love about our ancestors is that they were confronted with that. We have a story in Genesis 1 that's a poem that reads like this, and we have more of a narrative in Genesis 2. Things are different. Let's leave them both in there.
Sure.
Because for them, obviously it wasn't about getting the facts right, about where this all started. It was about making a theological claim about what it means to be human in creation in relationship with the divine. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I think if we come to the first chapters of Genesis with some sort of expectation that we're going to have good science, right. I mean, they believed in a 3-tiered universe, and we can't fault them for that. That was the best information they had at the time.
Mm-hmm. They as in who?
The people who wrote the Bible.
Oh, okay. What's a 3-tiered universe?
So this assumption, it actually shows up in the New Testament too. So when Paul in Philippians 2 writes about every knee shall bow, like in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, that there was this belief that this is how reality looks, right? And if you search like, I'm trying to remember which textbook. I taught Hebrew Bible at Western Kentucky University.
Okay.
And there's a specific textbook I used that had this great illustration of if you take Genesis 1 literally, what it looks like is you have like a flat you have a dome for the sky that has windows in it, which is where you open and the rain comes out.
Sure.
The earth is on like these pillars and there's this area underneath it. And so I think literalizing those stories actually works against what the writers are trying to say, because they're theologians, they're not scientists. And I'm completely enamored with science. I know I'm not a scientist.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, same. No, I'm the same. I mean, I had someone try to talk to me this summer, which it's when these types of things happen, it's shocking to me. I don't know really I don't feel like I fully understand the thought processes that get someone there. Okay. And I feel like I'm fairly open-minded. So, I mean, I didn't mind the discussion. I appreciated it or whatever, but the person was talking to me about the fact that somewhere in the Bible is, I want to say it's in Psalm somewhere, but it's the idea that the foundations of the earth, and they were using that to posit that there's a very real chance that the earth is flat. And because for that to happen, you have the foundation and then you have kind of the dome above. It's almost like what you were saying.
Yep.
And I just find it sort of, I guess, shocking. Like, I feel like I'm fairly unshockable, but for someone in 2020 to think that the earth is flat, it's like, man, well, first of all, there's lots of, I don't think that that's what that verse is trying to convey, you know? Yeah. And second of all, there's so much science around the earth not being flat, but yet, you know, this person was pretty open to the idea that the earth may be flat.
I just think part of the importance of approaching the Bible is understanding the literature and understanding that, you know, when I go sit down and watch a movie, if it stars like Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, I'm assuming this is going to be a certain kind of movie.
Right.
You know, if I go into a movie called Die Hard, I'm going to expect Bruce Willis to jump a motorcycle through a helicopter.
Yep.
Because that's what an action movie is. And I'm going to expect a rom-com to do rom-com-y things. And when we come to the Bible, we read it as if it's all the same literature.
It's true.
When the reality is a psalm, a poem, a song is very different than a scientific textbook.
Yes.
And so I think in some ways we try to take the parts of the Bible and fit them into our categories.
I totally agree with that.
Instead of saying, what is this? What kind of literature is this? How would our ancient ancestors have approached this?
Yes.
Because it's not that, you know, they were so unsophisticated and now we're more sophisticated and we can, no, they actually understood it and we're making it more complicated.
Yes, I agree with that. It was someone else this summer I was having a conversation with. I think we were talking a little bit about eschatology, and it was like, well, there's that I think verse in Psalms that's talking about cattle on 1,000 hills. And my question was like, do you think that actually means 1,000 hills, not 999, not 1,001, but 1,000 hills? And they're like, yeah, they think think that actually means like 1,000 hills. I'm like, man, I don't. Okay, I'm not sure. Like, believe whatever you want. Like, I'm not even going to try to change your mind. I just don't think that's the main point of that verse, you know?
Right.
So that goes fully in line with what you're saying is we have to understand who was writing it and why, what the point was, what type of literature is. I'm in full agreement on that. On that Instagram post that I could not find, and then you also mentioned with your grandfather, I think it was, that you would probably disagree with almost everything. So then if it is a lot that you would disagree with mainstream Christianity, which I think was mentioned in the post or in reference to your grandfather, maybe talking about what you would disagree with, say with him, is maybe too long of a line. But can we just kind of start with what you then believe? Like maybe that would be and maybe that's a little bit too long too, but like let's look at like the areas where maybe you would agree with your grandfather and then some of the areas that you would disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would both agree that we love Jesus, right? I just think we would interpret his life somewhat differently, and the whole point of his life differently. Whereas I think mainstream Christianity would say that Jesus was born to die. The whole reason Jesus shows up is so Jesus can die and then pay the price for human sin and be raised from the dead. I don't begin there. I don't think that's how it works.
Okay.
I think that for me, penal substitutionary atonement has done so much damage to the gospel because it creates, first and foremost, a God who has to be bought off, a God who can't just love me and forgive me. I just struggled with the fact that Jesus would say, no, love your enemies and forgive people because that's what God is like. And then God's like, well, ish. But if you don't do this and believe this and say this, then you're going to be in big trouble. Or if I don't kill my son, I can't love you in the same way. And I just found that long-term problematic. And so I think if we begin with a God who has to be convinced to forgive us and love us, then we have a really, really sort of toxic place that we're beginning from. And I think it also creates in us an understanding of what it means to be human that works against human flourishing. And what I mean is, I'll never forget a few years ago being at a youth camp with our church group, and it was one of those things. When you sort of move into a more progressive faith space, you lose everything. Like you can't, like even taking your kids to church camp becomes sort of like, what are they going to hear that is almost like exactly the opposite of what we've been saying, right? And so how do we help them navigate what they think about that?
Sure.
But the camp pastor that week was like, I'm not going to try to scare your kids. I'm not going to threaten them. I'm just going to share what I believe to be the good news. It's like, okay, and then that night, like he starts threatening them and scaring them.
This was not a progressive camp, you're saying? Okay.
No.
Okay.
And so the point of the story is there was a kid from another church group who was sitting by himself up front crying, and one of our volunteers went over to him, and the kid was just saying, I'm terrible. I'm horrible. I don't deserve anything good. I'm a terrible human being. And the volunteer with us said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 11. He's like, you're 11. You're not terrible. You're not horrible. You're a human being that God loves dearly. And I think that we, from a very early age, when we're telling our kids that to be human is somehow to be less than good, when I think the reality is that to be human is exactly who we're supposed to be. And to use human as a way of sort of saying, well, I mean, we use it all the time, right? Well, I'm only human. This is why I screwed up. And I think the problem is it's not because we're human. I think the problem is we often choose to live in ways that are subhuman, that are beneath the humanity that God called good. And so for me, part of being a progressive Christian means, yes, we're not going to talk about God in the same way in terms of atonement, but we're also not going to talk about human beings in the same way. We want to recognize the original goodness in humanity and understand that, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. And we've made a lot of mistakes and errors, sins, whatever you want to call it. But the core of what God affirmed as good is good. And our mission should be to promote human flourishing. And I think when we do that, we're actually living into and out of the gospel, because I think that's what the gospel is about. Yeah. Human flourishing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure that I would even disagree on the human flourishing point. You know, I mean, it's... we have the kingdom of God is present now, right? It's not like we have to kind of just suffer along and hope he just comes back to save everything. Like that the kingdom of God is present now. But what do you do with, did you mention kind of going back to the original kind of goodness of human beings? It's not quite what you said, but where would you go back to? Like, would you believe in an actual Adam and Eve or no? Because I was just going to say, like, Cain and Abel, they weren't the best. Like, you know, we had some problems kind of almost right out of the gate.
Yeah. So I don't take those stories literally.
Oh, okay.
But for me, the truth of those stories, I would affirm the truth of those stories.
I see. I
don't need them to be literally true to be speaking an important truth.
Okay.
So, but here's what's really interesting. The sort of the way, at least I was, you know, as an evangelical, was brought into to understand the story is that in the Bible, Genesis 3, human beings disobey God. They commit the first sin as an act of rebellion, and everything falls apart. Here's what's really interesting. The word sin does not show up in the Bible until Genesis 4. In Genesis 3, at no point is the word sin used. And what's really maybe even more fascinating is sort of the way we've been taught to read the fall narrative is human beings sinned and then God can't be around them anymore, right? Like God is holy and pure, so God can't be. That's not what happens in the story. They sin and they go into hiding, and God shows up in the garden for the walk. They don't repel God. Their shame leads them into hiding.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the problem in Genesis 3 is that human beings, we allow shame to cause us to pull away from the very thing that can be healing for us.
Right.
And sin actually enters the story in Genesis 4 with the Cain and Abel story. And it's when Cain is angry because his brother's offering was accepted and his was. And, you know, I just think, like, at some point I wish they'd have said, I'm an English major in college. So coming to that writing piece where, like, we don't know why Cain, in the story, we're giving no indication of why Cain's offering wasn't accepted and why Abel's was. It's just a weird sort of, but that's when God says to Cain, sin is, and it's sort of the image of a cat ready to pounce. Like sin is crouched by the door, ready to pounce on you, but you must rule over it. And then he goes out and he says to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. And if you're watching this like a horror movie, you're screaming at the TV, do not go out into the field.
Right.
And of course, that's where he ends up killing his brother. And so for me, where I sort of land on that is I think that the original human sin, if you want to call it that, is violence. Because that's where sin shows up in the Bible. And it shows up as being this first act of violence. And it's not sins plural, it's sin singular. And it enters the story, and very quickly, this is not what you brought me in to talk about, but here we are. Very quickly, you go from Cain killing Abel to a descendant of Cain essentially saying, I killed somebody for wounding me, for hurting me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, Lamech, which is this descendant, is avenged 77 times, which is also a wink and a nudge to that in a Jesus story. When he's like, Peter's like, how many times do I forgive? Up to 77 times. It's a reference back to that story. And Jesus is like, nope, essentially limitless.
Yes.
Because we're trying to undo the story of human violence.
Yep. So let's just kind of going back to, kind of thinking like the beginning of time. Would you believe in an infinite God?
What do you mean?
Like a creator God that always has been and always will?
I don't believe in a being that's separate and distinct.
Okay. From
like that there's creation here.
Okay.
And there's a being called God that's somewhere back here.
Oh, okay.
I would lean more toward panentheism.
Okay.
Which is everything exists in God.
Okay.
So that God is not a distant, separate, detached reality.
Yep.
That if we're fish, God's the water. And that our experience, so the experience many of us talk about, which is experience of estrangement, but estrangement isn't separation. Yep. Estrangement is the sense, the feeling. It's an internal journey that has to be made.
Sure.
And so I don't think that there's a moment in our lives where we exist outside of God.
Yes. Well, I agree with that. But now you're not necessarily saying that creation is God, though.
No, that would be like pantheism.
Okay, got it.
Panentheism is all in God.
Yes.
Pantheism is essentially God.
Right. Yep. Okay, so what then if God if we are fish, God is the water, I agree with that. I guess I would kind of like affirm the simplicity of God, which was it Filson? David Filson was on here a couple months ago talking about that. But this idea that God is not a composite, right? It's not like God the Father, which we can talk about the Trinity then, but it's not like God the Father is a composite, a sum total of his parts, because then he would be dependent on his parts, and God isn't dependent on anything. And so he sort of is, God is everywhere at one time. But so it sounds like maybe we're in agreement with that. But if we kind of go back to, like, let me ask this, would you believe that there was a time then where there wasn't an earth, like there wasn't a creation?
Well, I think that, I guess, again, I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
But my assumption would be that we came from science. Scientists will say there was a singularity. There's all this energy and it exploded.
Yeah.
I would affirm that.
Okay.
I also don't know what happened before that.
Sure.
Right. Like some scientists suggest that right now the universe is expanding, and eventually entropy will take over, and it will begin to sort of crunch back in on itself and go back to where it was. And then the assumption is maybe it goes again. So I hold all of that very loosely.
Okay.
And just admittedly, I don't know.
Yeah.
When I talk about God, I think for me the word God is almost a metaphor for something that is more expansive than the word can hold.
Okay.
If I'm talking about God in terms of creation, I'm going to talk about God as the energy which brought an ordered creation into existence. Not some being who's going, bippity boppity boo, we'll put this over here, but sort of the energy that expands and undergirds and enlivens.
I see.
All things.
And then what do you make of Jesus Christ?
Love him. Big fan. Have all of his records. I think Jesus.
Do you think he was a son of God?
Well, what does that language mean? I affirm that language in its context.
Okay.
Which is, I think, twofold. One, I think to call Jesus Son of God in the Jewish tradition is to make a claim about Jesus being the actual king, right? Because if you go to the Psalms, what you'll find is these royal coronation psalms where the king of Israel is called the Son of God. So it's a way of saying, and of course this comes back from Samuel, right, where David is told by God that as long as your descendants are faithful, one of your children Solomon will be my son, and he'll rule the throne. And as long as he's faithful, his descendants will rule on the throne.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this sort of there's this adoption of the Hebrew Israelite king, Jewish king, as the Son of God theologically, right? And then in terms of first century Roman world, where there already was a Son of God on the throne, Caesar Augustus was literally called the Son of God. So
he called that in I don't remember. Like I don't remember like reading any of those verses. Even with you said the King of Israel, one of those was called the Son of God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, God says Solomon will be his son, and then there's some. If you look up coronation psalms,
Yep.
The actual one I'm referencing, I can't remember which one it is. There are like 150 of them.
Yep.
So they're in there, but there are psalms that sort of reference the Jewish king in that way.
I see, sure.
But in the first century, do you know much about the Roman Empire?
No, I really don't.
Oh, it's one of my favorite.
Oh, yeah?
Just in terms of, it makes so much more sense of the New Testament.
Oh, okay.
So in 45, 44 BCE, when Julius Caesar was assassinated, he adopted his great-nephew Octavian to be his successor, his heir. And so there's a whole lot of history I don't have time to go into, but I'll just say this. In July of that year, Octavian threw some games in the honor of Julius Caesar, his adopted father. And during the games in Julius Caesar's honor, there was this comet that appeared in the sky. And this is actually a thing that happened. And it appeared in the sky for about 7 days. And it was just so coincidentally perfect for Octavian, because what he says is, you know what that is? That is the soul of Julius Caesar ascending to the right hand of the gods, taking his place among the gods. And so if your father was a god, what does that make you? The son of God. It's politically brilliant for him. And so that was one of the titles. If you find Roman coinage with Caesar Augustus on it from the late BC's, early CE's, you'll find the son of the divine Julius, which is a claim. So for the Christians who come along and say, Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus is Lord, those are imperial titles. So they're not just religious, they're political. And so I totally affirm Jesus in those ways.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I thought of Jesus like Jesus was up in heaven and just like, let me get down there.
Sure.
Right? I don't think about it in that way.
Yep.
But I affirm what the theological content of those titles would mean.
Yep. So you would believe that Jesus was human and was born of an actual Joseph and Mary then?
Well, yeah,
or
whoever. Yeah.
Okay. A male and a female. And then so Jesus was an actual man.
Living, breathing
human
being.
Yep. Okay. And then obviously, you the cross, like all of that was actual, not figurative. Would you say? I
think we actually, among scholarship, there is so much more proof and evidence that Jesus lived. And outside of a couple people who are just really on the fringes, almost every scholar I know will say we can be pretty sure of a couple things: that Jesus lived, and that he made a fateful trip to Jerusalem and was executed. And his disciples had an experience afterward, whatever you want to believe that experience was.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, the fact that Jesus lived and died, it seems to me, if you're going to be taken seriously, it's beyond debate.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you know then? So it sounds like maybe you would interpret, is it safe to say you would interpret more of Scripture as maybe sort of allegory than some? Is that safe to say? Like, you're not necessarily saying that Adam and Eve were actual humans at that point in time, and there might have been some metaphor and
I would say that they're
how do you know kind of when to? I know that's a tricky question, but right.
So when my faith was really shifting, I'm not a good sleeper. Like I just like shutting my brain off. Like it takes a long time to just be like, I'm not going to think about that anymore.
Right.
Try to go to sleep. But I would spend nights awake going, what is literal and what's not? I have to know. And then I just got really comfortable with, I don't know and I can't know. I can give you my opinion. Like if you want to talk about scholarship, I can give you my opinion. I've studied my butt off and I have ideas about things. But ultimately, in terms of faith, I don't even really ask those questions anymore. So I'm going to look for the meaning. Right? Do I assume that there are stories told about Jesus in the New Testament that are not only Jesus told parables, were parables told about Jesus? Yes, I think so. I think that, but I also think Jesus, like for example, I think some of the healing stories were parables. But I also think Jesus had a reputation for being a healer, whatever that means.
Okay. Yeah.
So if some of those are parabolic stories, right? Let's just take the walking on water let's just maybe at least assume the idea that maybe that story didn't literally happen. There had to be something about him that would lead them to tell stories like that. Right? So we're dealing with a remarkable, a person that when they encountered him, all bets were off. And they nothing in their tradition before had ever prepared them for the encounter they would have and what they would experience in this human life. So much so that they called it divine. And for me, like being able to sort out, I love the geeky scholarship conversations where we can discuss and argue about what might be literal, what might not be.
Right.
When it comes to actual faith and how I approach ministry, how I approach teaching us, there's a time, and maybe a small group where we'll dig into some of that.
Yep.
I may reference something in a sermon, but my goal in a sermon really is to help people find faith, to help people find something that can speak to them. And so I try to hold those two things and know when to lean into one and when to lean into the other. Obviously, it all informs.
Sure.
You can't separate that out.
Yep.
But that's generally my approach.
Yep. So do you think then that we're going back to sort of the Son of God terminology and even sort of the political heads or authorities as it kind of were in the Roman Empire and so forth, do you think that Jesus was God when he was on earth, or do you think that it was more actually of like, here is Jesus, a man who is now the head or kind of head honcho, so to speak, or the man in charge of this new kingdom, this new way of life?
My favorite heresy is, which is a great way to start it, my favorite heresy, the one I think that the church, let me back up and say this. I think that there are, throughout the New Testament, Christian writers disagree on when Jesus sort of either came to self-awareness or when Jesus became Son of God, right? So Mark believes it's at his baptism. Matthew and Luke assert it's at his birth. John assumes it was like at the beginning of creation, right? Like so, and then Paul in Romans 1 says Jesus became the Son of God in power at his resurrection. Which I bring all that up to say the fact that we ended up with some nice, neat, tidy theological categories for Jesus when the Bible's all over the place really kind of just, to me, shows how desperately we need that stuff, even if that's not what we get.
Yep.
I think that, I tend, if I was going to say, I'm going to lean into one, I would say, I think Jesus at his baptism, it seems to me, had an experience that gave him his sense of mission, calling, and identity. And I think when John the Baptist was arrested, that was his internal signal that now this, because I think Jesus and John's movement was different. Because I think John's movement sort of is waiting on God to come down and fix it all, right? If you read the stuff attributed to John the Baptist, it's God's coming and going to judge. And with Jesus, it's actually, if the world's going to get transformed, it's going to be through us.
Yeah.
And so I would say Jesus embodied the divine.
Okay.
Right? But I probably don't mean that in like Nicene categories in the same way. Like to me, that's just like those debates now to me seem like, why would we spend all of our time and energy trying to figure out how that worked instead of just embracing the experience of in this human life, people touch the divine.
Yeah.
And in his life, people realize that the divine isn't somewhere else, but it's right here among us.
Right. Okay. You want some more bourbon, by the way?
The answer is always yes.
Do Do you like Buffalo Trace?
I do.
I do too. Yeah. I think for the money, it's really good. Okay, so Jesus was born. He was a man. He did, like you said. There's a lot of, well, I was going to say science, but there's a lot of testimony to that fact that Jesus was here, and he embodied the divine. May not have been the Son of God, like a more traditional Christian belief would believe.
If you were to take Jesus into a lab and like do a DNA swab, like what would you discover? I think you'd discover a human being.
Yeah, human DNA.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're not willing to say that he was the Son of God. So it sounds like you don't affirm the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit.
I affirm the metaphor.
I see.
I would say the Trinity is a helpful metaphor.
Okay.
That because this is always what happens. We have experiences that then drive us back to our tradition to go, how in the world do I make sense of this? You see it in the New Testament when Matthew says, well, this happened to fulfill what the prophets said. Nobody had ever read the prophets that way before, right? Like last Sunday I did a sermon on the line in Isaiah 7:14, the young woman will become pregnant. The young woman is pregnant and will give birth to a child. And how Matthew went back to that. And it was a story about something that was happening 800 years before.
Yep.
But for Matthew, he went back to that and saw something in that in Jesus we experienced God with us in a way we weren't ready for. Right? So experience leads us back to the tradition, back to the text to grapple with it. And I think that's when our ancestors came up with the idea of the Trinity. I think what they were trying to make sense of is we have, because it's not in the New Testament, the language is not there. But there's this language of Father, Son, and Spirit, of course. Like, and they're pulling what if we're monotheists? We believe there's one God. Seems like we got three people we're talking about here. So I totally get and affirm the metaphor, because I think the core of the metaphor of the Trinity, in my understanding, is that God is relationship. That at the core of what we're talking about when we talk about God, we're talking about a relationship. And to see that expressed in, I tend, if I was gonna throw all my bet in on something, I like the sort of the Eastern Orthodox approach to Trinity better than the Western Latin. But I think ultimately most of our theological categories end up being metaphor in the sense that we don't have an objective place to speak from where we have all the information. Like when I was a kid, when the teacher would go on a bathroom break, we would sneak up and get the answers out of the back of the book.
Right.
And we don't have answers in the back of the book.
Sure.
So I try to say, I think throughout Christian history, we've come up with metaphors. And sometimes we've concretized them in a way that's been unhelpful. But hopefully if those metaphors continue to expand and grow with us, then of course I would affirm that.
Yeah.
I think when we get lost in the weeds of trying to figure out exactly how the Trinity works, then we've missed the point of the metaphor.
Yeah. So when it comes to, say, like Jesus dying on the cross, would you believe that he was nailed to a cross and did die that way? Okay. And then would you kind of look at that, and the big takeaway there would be that here was this man who embodied the divine, who kind of brought in the kingdom of God in some sense, and then was willing actually to give his very life for those beliefs or lifestyle, and the lesson there is he was willing to give his life. And so, are we kind of willing to, like, if you don't believe that Jesus' death on the cross was like, a substitution, penal substitution, you talked, I guess, what would be the significance that you would give to then Jesus' death on the cross?
What I think is interesting is the assumption lots of people make that penal substitution is the I'm going to quote that, air quote this, original atonement theory, when, it doesn't pop up until after Anselm in the 1000s. So, you have 1,000 years of church history without it. I would say this. I think that there are some real concrete political reasons Jesus died. And religious, like we make this assumption that you can divide those things out. There's the religious, there's the economic, and there's the political. But in the ancient world, specifically in Jewish culture and in Roman culture, nobody divided the world up that way. Everything was, if it's religious, it's political. I mean, the Jewish temple that Jesus sort of enacted a symbolic judgment against was both a religious site, the seat of political power, and the seat of economic power.
Sure.
So I think if you want to say why, historically, why did Jesus die? Jesus died because he started a kingdom of God movement.
I see.
And claimed that this kingdom of God movement essentially was where people should put their allegiance, which is high treason. So Jesus was executed because there's only one Lord, there's only one Son of God, and there's only one empire, and that's Rome. And when you come saying that you embody and represent another kingdom, you are now a claimant to the throne that must be executed.
I see.
Now, I think part of what makes Jesus' story so compelling to me is that when in his death, we see love extended to his executors. So if I was, I'm a atonement theory light, as I've said, but if I were going to pick one, the moral influence theory of Abelard would be more of where I would lay down. In the death of Jesus, we see what the heart of God looks like.
Oh, okay.
We see God in Jesus not cursing his enemies, but praying for them.
Okay, sure.
We see God in Jesus opening his heart to the world, even as the world rejects and executes. Historically, John Dominic Crossan has a great line that I tend to go back to, which is the cross was essentially Jesus came offering an alternative vision for the world. The cross was Rome's no. Like, we've read your application, denied.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't want your world. Yeah,
Yes.
Everybody having enough to eat, that's going to affect us. We don't want that.
Yeah.
The resurrection then becomes God's yes. God's affirmation that actually Jesus was right and we should listen to him. And so that's the political tension that exists inside of our faith. And it's the tension that people, I think, miss by and large. I miss most of my life, seeing that actually this is a very political story.
Yep.
But it's also religious, because only in America do you believe you can divide those things out and somehow have, this is my political opinion, but here's what I believe religiously. I mean, if you believe that everybody in the world should have enough food to eat, and that doesn't affect your politics,
right?
I don't really respect that.
Yeah.
Like, let's just at least be honest.
Right. How do you find that? I actually want to come back around then and kind of hear how your journey into this progressive Christianity then. But do you find that people that are new to this way of thinking, no matter kind of what background they're from, do many or any of them just be like, man, I get what you're saying, but I don't even know what to believe or not to believe anymore. Like, now I'm really confused about like what even is true and what's not, and allegory and metaphor and all of this stuff. Like, is that common, or do you just say, I get that, but listen, all I'm saying is I'm pointing you to the kingdom of God and a love relationship and doing good in this world and loving others and not being violent? Do you kind of just point him to like the principles that Jesus espoused while he was on earth and say, look, I get the mystery that you're saying. We all have that mystery. Like, how do you navigate through that?
Probably pastorally, the way I would approach that is to say, there's a lot we don't know. So here's what I do know. I do know that when I look at the life of Jesus and I see how he lived and engaged the world, that seems to me to be a better way to live.
Right.
And a better way to be human. And so, I tell people this all the time. I wouldn't call myself a theist in the sense of supernatural theism, right? But I'm not an atheist. The word God has a lot of content for me. But if I woke up tomorrow and I was like, all that there is matter, and what it means to be human, like that's all we got. That's it, done. I would still be a Christian because I still believe that the way of Jesus leads to a better world.
Okay.
And I don't think it's the reason the world's in such bad shape is not because, there are 2 billion Christians who've tried it and it just didn't work. It's because there are 2 billion Christians who've really never tried the way of Jesus. We just haven't. Not in the way Jesus advocated it.
Yeah.
That we leave, to your point about the cross, we leave out a big part of it, which is Jesus saying to his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to die on a cross. You have one too. Go get it and carry it.
Yep.
Right? Like this has never been Jesus going, this is my gig.
Right.
It was always Jesus saying, I'm leaving, I'm gonna lay the trail out. And you're supposed to follow.
I see.
And that's one of the things they ended up metaphorizing. Maybe they shouldn't have. The cross, like we all have a cross.
Yes. Yep.
What does that mean to live in a way that challenges the empire?
Sure. Yep. What do you make of, was it Paul that said basically, like, if my hope is only in this life, then I have of all men most miserable? Like, what do you make of that then?
I would say I agree with Paul.
Okay.
Like if what we're banking on ultimately is that we're gonna go give our lives for something, and it's just all a big sham. I would agree with Paul. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Paul expected. The thing I love about him and also find frustrating about him is his ability to just pick a metaphor and then leave it mid-sentence and pick another metaphor. So when it comes to resurrection, what did Paul think? What did Paul think it meant? I think you could have some really fun discussions around that. For me, at the core, what I see in the early Christians is a real experience that the Jesus they had known was not a person of the past, that they had experienced him after his death in a way that transformed them and led them to draw conclusions that nobody would have drawn.
Yeah.
And so, I do think that if Paul's saying, if the only thing I can hope for is to make a lot of money and live a good, long life and everything go my way in this life and nothing beyond that, then what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? That's meaningless.
Yep. I'm just thinking to the comment about if everything was just matter and it was all of a sudden very clear that there was no divine, no outside, no God, and it was just matter, that the Christian way of life would still be the best for the world. I totally agree with that it would be. Although, at that point, though, we're asking people to live their lives individually at a sort of an individual cost in exchange for the betterment of society. And
which I would say
that's asking a lot of.
But I would say that's the deal. Like, that's why you and I are here right now. And I think that I say this all the time. I think that the reason we exist now as a species is because at some point in our evolution, our ancestors made a choice. And that choice is, our goal is to make sure that this thing continues, that our descendants keep happening,
right,
and that their lives will be better.
Right.
How many of our great-grandparents made decisions? I go back to this whole thing of like, I believe in nonviolence, but I'm just completely in awe of our ancestors, our grandparents, great-grandparents, who charged into a beach in Normandy, knowing they would be killed, guaranteed. And now we got people going like, I don't know, but I just want to go eat out and not wear.
Sure.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, people gave so I think that there's a certain amount of, for me, where watching my 11-year-old, so our oldest son is biracial, and watching him come into his own and seeing him identify with himself as being a black young man. And the way this last summer he's been completely attuned to what's going on in the world. And, the death of George Floyd affected him deeply. And watching him start to discover a voice and want to use it, watching kids, high school kids come out and begin to work for change in gun laws, watching kids start going, hey, the planet matters, we should care about climate change. It makes me believe that the future is going to be better.
Yeah.
That they have the moral courage to do things that my generation, our parents, they didn't have the moral courage for that.
Sure.
They will. And so I do think there's a certain sense of, if we take Jesus seriously, if the only thing that gets us is that my grandkids grow up in a better world, and that their kids grow up in a better world, then for me, whatever cost that brings, I welcome it.
Yeah. So you sort of have this optimism in individual morality where at personal expense, we will kind of do what's right or do what's good or do what's good for future generations. That
well, I hope. I don't.
Yeah.
Right now,
and sometimes it goes better than others, right? I mean, it's like
it seems iffy right now, like listening to the way some people are responding to the world.
Yeah,
but I do believe, and I get the whole, like you said, individualism. Like, there's a certain part of me that's like, I think if we keep leaning into individualism, then we're not going to get there.
Yeah.
Because if the most important thing in the world is my own experience of it, then we're in trouble. Because there are a lot of people who are having some really terrible experiences of the world right now. So, I feel like if if you take, which you can't take religion off the table, but you take that out of the table, like how are we living in a way that is going to ensure that our descendants have a better reality than we did, so that they have clean air and water, and I think those things really, really matter. And I think helping our society get to the point where we, the gifts of American freedom are many, but there's also a challenge that comes with it, which is we believe that ultimately our personal freedom matters more than the good of society as a whole.
Right. Yep.
And I don't believe that. I think that the common good is more important than my own personal enjoyment of it. Now I want to enjoy it.
Right.
But
yep.
When the chips are down.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And so, well, we could talk. I mean, we could talk for hours about like specific beliefs and everything like that. So, I think and I'm enjoying it, by the way. So thank you for sharing all that. I'm learning because I don't know. I haven't talked with that many people face to face like this that I think believe what you believe, and so I'm definitely learning a lot. And I mean, we may disagree with a lot. Look, when I sent you the email, I said I think we probably agree with a lot and disagree on some. It could be that we disagree with a whole lot, and I'm totally cool with that. I'm still very glad you're here. Yeah. How did you get into this? What we would consider kind of progressive Christianity, and is that a good term for it?
Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of the verbiage, but it's increasingly, what ends up happening with all language is you want to have to be able to define it every time people use it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, here's what I mean by that.
Right.
Generally, yes, progressive Christianity is what I would talk about. How did I get into it? I think it began when I was 11 years old. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but my categories for so many things were being shattered. And even as I started preaching, I was saying everything I was supposed to say. I was struggling with a lot of it. And then, I'm trying to remember, part of it was, and I'm sure a lot of people would say that. So when I talk to people like about our age who I'm like, tell me how you got into this. It's the same people who got them into this. Right. So I stumbled upon Rob Bell.
Okay. Yep.
Right. And the first thing I heard about from Rob Bell was a pneuma. And it was a pneuma where he talks about sort of the history behind something. And I'd never heard anybody talk about the history of the New Testament before. Like in the sense that I just assumed the place I'm from in Eastern Kentucky, the whole area has this, it's affectionately called Pond Creek.
Pond Creek?
Pond Creek, yeah.
Okay.
And I had just assumed Jesus grew up there and spoke King James English.
Right. And that's how we think, right?
That's how we think. And then I'm
absolutely.
like, Jesus says this stuff in the New Testament, but there's all this background nobody ever told me about. And then I ended up reading a book called A Generous Orthodoxy by Brian McLaren. And that book, he said things that I had never thought, but he also said things that I'd secretly thought out loud on paper. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's okay to have these questions. And that just sort of led down the rabbit hole of being into, I read a lot of N.T. Wright for a while, read a lot of Marcus Borg.
Oh, yeah, N.T. Wright?
He was a gateway drug for me.
Really? Now, but he wouldn't be, he's not considered a progressive Christian, would he?
No.
That's why you say gateway drug.
Yeah, but N.T. Wright's perspective was different than American evangelicals too. Right? Like he valued history.
Sure.
He valued where this stuff came from. And I knew when my faith was shifting because like I would read Marcus Borg. Are you familiar with Borg?
I am not.
He's he'd be a progressive. He passed away a few years ago. But I would read him, and he and N.T. Wright wrote a book together. Okay. Where it was called Jesus Two Visions, where they would both address each issue. And when I first read that book, I loved so much about what Marcus Borg said, but I disagreed with his conclusions, and I was with N.T. Wright. Okay. And then as I went on, I noticed I was shifting. My opinion was shifting. Okay. Over time to Borg.
Okay.
But also, so N.T. Wright is somebody who he's one of the only people that I have impacted me in a significant way at one point that I haven't been able to sit down and talk to. And so I would love that opportunity to sit down and just talk to him because I think he's brilliant.
Yes. And but he lives across the ocean, right?
Yeah, he lives in England.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I would love the chance just to talk to him because I think he'd be a good conversation partner. But so he was part of that for me. But then, the Marcus Borgs, the John Dominic Crossan's, John Shelby Spong, so those people have also played such a huge role as I've been sort of moving.
I see.
in another direction.
And this was like in your teen years you're reading this stuff, or did this not start until like in your 20s or even in your 30s?
20s.
Oh, okay.
Early to mid 20s.
Okay.
Honestly, if you want to know who really brought me into the world of reading books that weren't the Bible, which is the slippery slope, was Max Lucado.
Oh yeah.
Max
What do you mean reading books that weren't the Bible?
We had there's a moratorium growing up. Like, you don't read things that aren't the Bible. It's just dangerous.
Really? Mm-hmm. Is this a Southern Baptist thing, or at least in your context there?
More Free Will Baptist, but yeah, I know lots of people from the Southern Baptist background who'd be like, when you start reading things besides the Bible, that's when you're on the slippery slope.
Oh, wow. What I always have a hard time with that is it flies in the face of just this very practical reality, which is, hey, we're not the first people on earth. There have been people before us. I wonder what they thought and what they learned. And you have this kind of cumulative wisdom that can be transferred from generation to generation if people write stuff down and other people read it. Like, just how do they get around that practical reality? You know what I mean?
I mean,
that's what never made sense to me with this only read the Bible stuff.
But, I don't know. And Free Will Baptist is not like a monolith either. There are differences depending on where you are. Where I'm from, up a holler in eastern Kentucky, was when they would show up at church, you didn't know who was going to preach. You didn't know what songs you were going to sing or who was going to sing them. It was all spirit.
Oh, I see.
And so there'd be moments when my grandfather, as the pastor, would be conducting the service, and he would say, I'm going to preach today. Or he would say, Brother so-and-so is going to preach today. And you would see Brother so-and-so get his Bible out. It was like this big, these massive Bibles. Because the bigger your Bible, the more spiritual you are. And start thumbing through looking for something.
No way. Yeah. He didn't know he was about to preach. Oh,
and
wow.
And then sometimes it would have been especially bad. It would be so-and-so is going to open and so-and-so is going to close. So like lunch just got postponed by another 45 minutes.
That's every young boy's nightmare.
Like this gives me 45 more minutes to get in trouble. Yeah. While I'm not paying attention.
Right.
And so, after I started preaching, going back to the church I grew up in, and they were like, we're going to ask Brother Josh to come up and preach today. And I was like, okay, let's go do this.
Yeah.
But you just never know. It's like
Yep.
Who knows? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, spirit trumps everything. And not just spirit. It's very subjective. But I think it's objective. But it's very subjective. Mm-hmm. It's whatever I'm thinking, how I interpret it, how I've been told to interpret it. So you could bring in an outside and say, look, well, have you ever thought about this? Because the Spirit's telling me that maybe we need to go this way. Mm-hmm. But no. It's like locked in a specific time. Yep. So the idea of saying, well, maybe we could learn something new. Nope.
Right.
It's all been learned.
Yes.
We just are preserving it.
Yes. Which is a dangerous mindset, to think that everything's been learned and all we do at this point is preserve it. It puts the Bible and the gospel at its heart solely on defense, which is just not. That's how do you win a game with just defense? You know what I mean? Sure. All right. So how does Richard Rohr fit into all this? It's interesting to me you didn't mention his name with readings.
So like I've read Richard. I think he's got some brilliant ideas. I think the thing that he has most given me in his writings is sort of a connection back to mysticism.
Okay.
And what I mean by mysticism is this: I can get very lost in my head. And especially when I was going through unraveling and trying to figure out what I believed, it was very much a cerebral. But human beings, we're not built just to be cerebral. Mm-hmm. There has to be a heart to it. And so some of what Richard Rohr has brought to the table, I think, with his spirituality is he's reminded us that you're not just a head, you're a heart.
Right.
And that the divine is not just to be thought about, but to be experienced. Mm-hmm. And I definitely say I'm not an expert on his writings. I've read a few of his books.
Okay.
He's definitely brought a lot to the table for a lot of us in the sense that many of us got here through our brains.
Oh, I see.
And there's a moment where it's like, the older I get, and I love the brain side of it so much. I love to talk about it. I love to talk about how we got the Bible, what we know and what we think. But sometimes it's just important to feel connected.
Right.
To feel connected to God, to feel connected to Christ. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of spirituality, that it's possible to be a thinking person, to have lots of doubts and questions, to push back on what you were handed, and also to long for connection.
Yep.
and to feel like you have a heart that needs to be tended to, not just your brain.
I see. Yep.
And that's been a gift.
Yeah. I think I've only read one Richard Rohr book. I think it's called Falling Upward. It's over there. And then also that Enneagram book. I think Richard Rohr his name is on the cover as at least one of the authors. But I didn't really know who he was when it was a few years ago that I read that one on the Enneagram. But I thought Falling Upward was encouraging to me. I don't remember. It's been a couple years since I've read it, but I thought it was well written and it was encouraging. It seemed to, if I recall it right, it seemed to be kind of speaking to people in sort of a midlife sort of time. Yep. And so I remember getting some encouragement on it, but I haven't read much of Richard Rohr. So is he sort of a spokesperson for progressive Christianity or not necessarily?
I mean, I think it would. I don't know how he would answer that.
Okay.
He's a Franciscan.
Okay.
Look, I have lots of friends. I've never met Richard personally. I have lots of friends who know him, and I have lots of friends who've gone out to Center for Action and Contemplation and gone through his living school, and they've found that to be deeply meaningful. Most of the people I know who engage with him are progressives.
Oh, I see.
And sometimes wonder like how the Catholic Church handles him.
Right, I've wondered that too.
But I also watched his book, The Universal Christ. We did a book study on it at Grace Point.
Okay.
One of the first things I was a part of there, and I wasn't leading it; I was just around. And one of the things I like, the book is brilliant. It's really insightful. And what he tries, like he in language, I think, does try to create a big tent so that people who are familiar with traditional language can feel like they're...
That makes sense.
Yeah. And the thing that drove me crazy about the book was he proof texts a lot.
Okay.
And I know why he does it. He does it because it's a big tent, and there are people who are going, where are you getting this from?
Okay.
And he's like, for me, where I'm at, it's going to sound terrible. I don't need the Bible to say something in order to believe it.
Okay.
Because I can understand the Bible as being our ancestors were giving us what they had in their experience in describing the world. And there are times when that language still works.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. And there's also times where that language is inviting us to move it. And here's an example. I heard Brian McLaren give once. He was talking about how his dad was a doctor. And one of the books that somebody had given them, maybe one of his dads, when they were going to have their first child, said that women should smoke a certain number of cigarettes per day for the health of the baby. This is like in the 50s or something, 70s. Like the book was written in like the 50s or something. And now we know, my goodness, don't smoke cigarettes if you're pregnant. Don't.
Ever.
It's not good for you. It's not good for the baby. But there's a certain amount of, when we look back on some of the things our ancestors said based on their worldview, and we're like, how barbaric. No. They were doing important work. Mm-hmm. We don't get where we are without them. And the way I've come to frame this is when we moved from our last house, one of the things I found in just a box was my very first iPod. And it was, I remember when I got it, I'd wanted one forever. And the first one I got was like the first generation video iPod.
Oh, yeah?
And I find this while we're moving, and my 11-year-old sees it, almost 11-year-old. He's like, what is that?
Right.
And I was like, this is before the iPhone. This is where you listen to music. He's like, what? Can you make phone calls on it? I was like, no. He's like, can you get on the internet? I was like, no, this is literally just a device that you put music on. And he couldn't fathom it. What I tried to explain to him is if we don't have this, we don't get the iPhone.
Right.
And whatever's next, right? We get none of that. Mm-hmm. This now looks to us like, why would you waste your time on something you couldn't get on the internet, you couldn't make a phone, you couldn't text? But for this moment in time, it was the next step forward. And every iPhone, inside of it, is this iPod. Mm-hmm. Because to get there, and one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got as a human being was you have to own all the Joshes. Which means inside of me is every me I've ever been. The me I disagree with now. The me that was 12. The me, it's all in there. And, and so much of my journey was trying to distance myself from where I came from.
Yes.
Instead of saying, as Rohr would say, everything belongs.
Okay.
And I don't get to be me now without me then.
Yeah.
And so it all fits. And we don't become who we are in the iPhone without the iPod.
Yep.
And this idea of we have to include it all, and yet we're also transcending it and doing something else.
Yep.
And in my mind, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I like that because then we don't have, I think we all have these parts in our past where we would totally disagree with, or we're embarrassed by, or we're ashamed of, or and we would never go back and be that person again or believe those things again. But the way you put it, I think it kind of brings a wholeness to it, where we don't have to try to carve those things out, pretend like it never happened, separate ourselves. There's a congruency. I mean, we're all growing and learning and on a journey. So I like the way you frame that. When you say, though, that you don't necessarily believe that this is not quite what you said, but where the belief we need to come from Scripture, or maybe the truth from Scripture, where would you sort of see that coming from? Like then the brightest minds of our day would have some say on that, or whoever has the idea that's most congruent with how Jesus lived maybe would be something we could trust, or where would you sort of like, who would say then what is true if it's not, out of the Bible?
Right. Well, ultimately, I think the problem you get into when all truth has to be located only in Scripture is that there are all kinds of things that the Bible doesn't talk about.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
That then we're having to use an NT, I'm going to just jump into NT Wright, to use this metaphor he used, which is that imagine you had somebody discovered a Shakespearean play, that it's mostly complete, but halfway through the fifth act, there's nothing. And he's like, what do? Do you just not perform the play? Or do you bring in experts in Shakespeare?
Yeah.
And let them create, and you bring in actors and let them create where this goes.
Yes.
And his point is that's where we end up being. We're in an unfinished play, and we're trying to sort out how we move forward.
Sure.
And so, part of my seminary training, I didn't finish there, but I did some training at a Methodist seminary, even though I'm not Methodist. And one of the things I learned about there was the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. I don't know if this is familiar.
No, I haven't heard that.
But it's essentially, and Wesley didn't use that language, but it's essentially 4 different tools that Wesley suggested we use for theological conversation and decision. And it was Scripture, reason, tradition, and experience.
I see.
And so you when you're testing something, you lay them against that backdrop.
Yeah. Okay.
So what does Scripture say? What does reason say? Because was it Copernicus or Galileo? God gave us a brain. God intends us to use it. Right? Reason matters. Experience matters. I mean, I think you go back to as the New Testament was being written, you have people who are just going like Simon Peter goes off experience and says, we're going to include everybody in this, not just people who are like us. So I think that there's a certain amount of that. I value experience heavily.
Yep.
Now, again, can be subjective, so you need other ways of trying to sort out what is my experience.
Yep.
And I think community is really important for that. I think that one of the gifts of the Protestant Reformation and the printing press was everybody gets a Bible. If you want a Bible, you get a Bible. One of the downsides is that everybody then becomes their own theological interpreter of everything.
Sure.
So that then you're just deciding what you think.
Right.
Disconnected from people who are going, nobody's ever read it that way, and there's a reason for that.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Right? So,
yeah, I see. So I think I get it now. So you're just saying that you can extrapolate, you can look at principles in Scripture and then kind of filter it through some other things and then make good decisions based on that.
So let me give you an example. I think that one of the most brilliant lines in Scripture, and a writer named Thomas Cahill, who wrote a series called Hinges of History. He has a book called The Desire of the Everlasting Hills in the New Testament. And he says in that book that Paul, in Galatians 3, makes the very first egalitarian claim in human history, that there in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, you're all one in Christ. The way I would agree with Paul on that, and I would go on to say, I think today Paul would probably say there is neither LGBTQ or straight.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like I believe, and if Paul wouldn't, he should.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I would say to that.
Yeah.
So I would say I think that there is a place where we start. I don't think we don't start with the Bible. And I know, I would say there are people I talk to all the time who have been so wounded by the Bible. I would never say, you should go read that.
Sure.
But what I hope I can do is for people who feel that way and feel grief because they miss the Bible, that I can help them approach it in a way that deals with the grief and also says that maybe the way it was used actually wasn't the way it was intended to be used. Maybe there's another way to approach this.
Yep.
And so I know for lots of progressives, the Bible doesn't play a huge role. That's just true, and let's like it just doesn't. I don't know any other way to do that. Like to give a sermon, generally I start with the Bible.
Sure,
because I love it, and because it is. I think that it's a beautiful place, rightly understood.
Yep.
To start from.
Yeah, makes sense. I think you're communicating your viewpoints clearly. So great job, by the way. And let's talk about LGBTQ. And Grace Point is LGBTQ affirming. And what do you think is one of the most misunderstood things about that? Do you call it a movement? What do you call it?
I just call it being human.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't, I think there was, at the same time Grace Point was making their work on this, I was doing my work in rural Kentucky in the same way.
Okay.
So, I think there's a lot of misconception. And I think that the church, we've just been so slow on so many things. I mean, the church has been slow on recognizing the gifting and calling of women. Big swaths of the church were pro-slavery and pro-segregation. And so I think the fact that still lots and lots of Christians are not open to at least thinking maybe we've been wrong on this, and maybe this is maybe this is the Spirit leading us into another sheet gets dropped down. The voice of God says, "Kill him." Like maybe, and I do think this is in our own time another one of those moments.
Okay,
I do.
And do you find that? Well, I was going to ask about the move from Grace Point. There was a time when Grace Point wasn't so LGBTQ affirming, correct? And then kind of moved into that, and then and of course created kind of problems in the church, which is kind of understandable, right? Or you would kind of assume that that's going to be the case unless they had been like LGBTQ affirming, because this is sort of a hot button issue, and people do believe differently about this. But do you see that this is a hill you're willing to die on, basically?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And what is that hill, basically? Can you help me to understand that?
That the LGBTQ plus community is affirmed, embraced, and celebrated.
Okay.
That who they are is not a problem for God, but God made them who they are. And so for us, the way that works out is at Grace Point, it's just not even a... Oh,
yeah.
Lost my headphones. At Grace Point, that's not even it's not even something I think about, in the sense like we have LGBTQ folks at every level of leadership, at every level of involvement. And I think that's, in my gut, that's where we should be, and that's how the church should look.
So how do you look at gender then? Like, is it so when it comes to being kind of born male and female, you would kind of affirm science in that regard, but then would believe that sort of like as you kind of develop and grow up, you might realize that maybe you're actually supposed to be born the other way, or maybe you want to experience life the other way? Like, how do you kind of...
I would say this. I'm not an expert at all. I have many friends who are transgender, and I celebrate who they are. I just don't... I don't know how to say it. I don't have a lot of strong, I know about this. Right? It's a thing where I listen to the experience of other human beings and affirm them, because if my goal is to help create human flourishing, then human beings feeling like they're at home in their body, that their identity expresses who they are in the world. That to me is I'll die on that hill, because I want you to flourish as a human being, to be the person that God made you to be in the world.
Yep. And isn't it safe to say that the LGBTQ community has felt pain, deep pain from the church at large in Western America, right? Is that a safe thing to say?
Oh my God, yes.
And where are they experiencing that pain? Do people think that they shouldn't be that way? Do people think that, what? I'm kind of curious where the pain comes from, because, I guess we may as well just speak openly, right? I feel like some people just wouldn't understand that at all, and would be abrasive and confrontational and condemning, and may say hurtful things. And that's got to be wrong, right? We can disagree just kind of at premise with anything, right? But there's a right and a wrong way to go about disagreeing.
Sure.
And it seems to me like one of the ways that we've gotten it wrong with the LGBTQ thing is we've been sort of like vengeful and attacking and just saying very bad things. And by the way, I have not heard these things at our church or in our community. But they're out there, right?
Sure.
And so, is that where the pain comes from, or is it the pain that they feel like they're misunderstood, or where do you think the sharpest pain comes from in that community in relation to, I guess, evangelical Christianity in Western America, which is where we're at?
So I would say first, the thing I try to always remember is that I represent privilege to the nth degree, in the sense that I'm a white, straight, cisgender male in the United States of America. And so I have an amount of privilege where it would be almost impossible for me to say where a person in the LGBTQ community would feel the most pain. Mm-hmm. As an observer and as an ally, what I can say is I think part of the pain comes from just simply being excluded. I think part of the pain comes from the bait and switch that so many churches do, where they put everybody's welcome on their sign. And what they mean is everybody's welcome to sit in the seat and give us their money, but not everybody's welcome to volunteer, and we're not going to dedicate your baby, and we're not going to perform your wedding, which means that you can't really belong in a community if you can't belong fully in a community. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain amount of, if there is a barrier to belonging, then you don't really belong.
Yeah.
And every time somebody else gets to experience one of these milestones in the church, and you don't, simply because of who you love, then that, I think it creates a deep wound.
Sure.
And I think that for lots and lots of people, that bait and switch, like it would be better for churches, and I know churches don't say it partly because they want the attendance and the revenue that come from people showing up, right? Like, and the other reason is they don't want to seem to be hateful, but I almost think it would be more honest to say, look, of course you can come here, but here's the boundaries. Mm-hmm. Here's how far, because I think it sets people up for wound after wound after wound. And that's why when people are like, at Grace Point, are you all welcoming? I was like, yes, but we're completely and totally affirming.
Okay.
Which is different.
I see.
We don't just welcome, we affirm who you are, we affirm who you love, and we want you to be as involved as you want to be in every level of this community. Yep. And so, I think that there's a lot of pain that has gone around, and just the misconceptions people have, and the way people, it's just, I think that this is a community of people who have been really, really wounded. Mm-hmm. And every time you get to the, our church marches in Pride every year here in Nashville, and you get to the end of Pride, and there's a guy with a bullhorn screaming a lot of uncharitable things.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
It is a reminder that for every, this guy's out here saying it, but there are lots and lots of places where it's a don't ask, don't tell.
Yep.
But, so the fact that anybody in the LGBTQ community who's been through that would choose to trust a church again, it is a sheer act of grace on their part. And so, for me at Grace Point, for our community, it's definitely one of those hills we will bleed out on every single time.
Yep. Now, if we just think that through, you're saying you're affirming to LGBTQ, and you mentioned the sign on the church saying we're welcome to everyone. And I think there can be a distinction, right, between being welcoming and loving and then also affirming and encouraging, right? So you wouldn't necessarily, there are people that you wouldn't affirm and encourage. I'm just trying to think of like
white supremacists.
Exactly. That's a great, yes. So if a white supremacist wants to come into your church and not be repentant of that, you're not going to affirm and encourage that.
They're not going to enjoy the sermons.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're still making value judgments about, like you might still want them to come in and sit quietly, and you would love to change their heart, right? You'd love to change their
I want white supremacists everywhere to repent.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So there can be a difference between welcoming and loving and affirming and encouraging.
Yeah. So I think, if I would have two positions. If a white supremacist came into our community on a Sunday morning and they were not, I'm trying to decide, like there's a part of me that would just say, look, we have people of color in our community
go elsewhere.
Join us online.
Right.
There's the other part of me that would say if they come in quietly and we're like wanting to learn, like I would want to see them transformed because I believe white supremacy is a sin. Mm-hmm. I don't believe being LGBTQ plus is a sin. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're getting at. There's a difference.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good distinction. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what do you make then of, okay, you're affirming and encouraging of that. What do you make of gender then? I'm just curious. Like, is it, I have heard terms, by the way, I am zero expert here, so I'm super out of my depth right now.
Yeah, I'm not an expert either.
Okay. But you are a pastor of a church that affirms this. And so I'm thinking you know way more about this than I, but like, what do you make of gender?
I don't think about it very much. I mean, like it's one of those things. Like I entered the world as a person of privilege, as I've said. So it's not a thing I've ever thought about very much, right? Because I've never felt sort of a disjointedness. Mm-hmm. But I have so many friends who have, and I want them to flourish as human beings. And so I trust them to know what's right for them, to know who they are, and then my job is to support them in that human flourishing. Mm-hmm. And so outside of that, I don't have a ton of questions for people. I just trust them to know who they are and where they are. And then my job as their pastor is to come alongside them and love them. Yeah. And support them.
Yeah. And if they are making decisions like with their person and their body and that type of thing, and they choose to do that, and it seems to be that that's how they're going to flourish best, like, you would affirm and encourage that. But if someone, and this is now outside of LGBTQ, but if someone wants to make a decision that has a negative impact on other people, then you wouldn't say, hey, I'm a man of privilege, you can make your own decision, right? You would then say, man, what you're doing is hurting other people. You need to stop doing that.
Can you give me an example?
I guess I'm coming back to the distinctions between, I guess, what you might be willing to affirm and encourage, and then maybe some areas that you're not. Yeah, so I think the white supremacy thing, you're not going to affirm and encourage that. That has a negative impact on other people. Certainly, we agree on that. Yep. How about with kids then? Like, if you had someone in your church that had a young kid, I don't know, by young, I guess we'd say under 10 years old, and that child felt like, they were born a male, but they want to experience life as a female. Like, what kind of counsel would you give your church member or attender for their child?
Yeah. So I would say that probably what the experience would be, and again, not an expert, but I would say it probably isn't, I want to experience life that way. It would probably be, I feel like this is who I am, right? Then I would say I would trust the parents, hopefully, to be able to navigate that. And to, one of the good things is at Grace Point, we have connections with people in our community who can help process that.
Yeah.
So I would say, my job as a pastor there is to provide pastoral care in the best way I possibly can for that family as they navigate that and make sure they have the resources they need to make sure that's being navigated well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And look, I just want to go on record to say that maybe some of the differences between welcoming and loving, I mean, I just think this point on having a disagreement with someone and still welcoming and loving and bringing them into community, that's a very big
It is, as long as there's honesty on the table.
Exactly. Yes. I totally agree with that. And so, like, I think where our church, and you're different than, your church would be different than ours. And so our church would want LGBTQ people to come to church. And we would want them to be welcome in the community and receive love and have brotherhood and all of this. We wouldn't affirm everything that you're willing to affirm or that you do affirm. But there would be a willingness to engage a conversation and not bring about confrontation and shame and neglect and us versus them. It seems to me like that point is where the church at large has gotten really wrong as they've related to people that they don't agree with.
I think so. Yeah, but I also think there's sort of one of the larger issues is for people in the LGBTQ plus community to go into a church that deep down believes that they can and should change. That the ultimate thing is not the content of their character, it's who they love. That feels unsafe. And I get that. It feels unsafe because ultimately, if I were to come into a church and nobody knew me, that they may say, well, we want to get to know the content of your character and figure out who you are. And then if you need to repent, we'll tell you.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not the content of their character. It's not the way they show up in the world. It's just their basic who they are as a human being. And look, I don't, some of the language we use around this, I don't live a heterosexual lifestyle. I'm heterosexual, but I don't talk about it that way. And when we phrase it as somebody's living a lifestyle, it's almost like this is something they're just deciding to do on a whim, or no, this is who they are. It's how they're wired. It's how they come into the world. It's who they're wired to love. And so I think to say we don't even know the content of your character. We're just more concerned about this. It fails. I think it fails them, and it's what makes church feel unsafe. Because most people, straight people, come in, and or cisgender people come in, and it's, well, we want to know who you are, so then we can decide. And I know that's not how churches talk about it, but like then we can decide what you need,
right?
Where you need to repent. But this is at the very fundamental nature of their humanity.
Yeah. Now, what do you make though of people that would say back like, well, not all these people, this isn't how they all came into the world, you know? Like they did come into the world, let's just call it male, and 25 years later, they felt like that is not how they want to continue to live in their
I bet it didn't take 25 years.
Okay. But for some it
that
did,
may be
right?
when they start talking about it.
Yeah.
But I would say that has been, I mean, even the people I know, I've been really fortunate that I've had several friends come out to me and trust me. And that is it feels like a sacred trust.
Oh, for sure it is.
And when they describe their experience, it has never been, I was this old, and I always, from the time I can remember, this was there. And I thought I couldn't lean into it. I thought it was, and then they're finally at the point where they have no other choice. But their survival and thriving depends on them being honest about who they've been the whole time.
Sure.
And so I think that's how I think people would frame that more so than 25 years in. I'm like, you know what?
Sure. Yeah.
This is not working. Let's do something else. It's very, I think, much more hardwired than that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wouldn't disagree with that. And I guess we should probably clarify whether we're talking about transgender or gay or whatever that happens to be. But yeah, I think let me ask this: what's been the response that you've received from a church that's openly welcoming and loving and affirming and encouraging of that? Are you one of the only churches in Nashville? One of the few? Is there many? Do you feel like when people from the LGBTQ community find you that they just feel like they found their kind of oasis? Or is this now become very common, and if you try every third church in Nashville, you're going to find this level of...
No, this is still the Bible Belt.
Okay.
I would say, I think as a whole, as a country, if you look at polls, we're moving in a direction of affirmation as a country. The majority of people in America would affirm same-sex unions, for example, marriage. I think in Nashville, I know of a few churches. I think that we have to be, there is a little distinction. There are churches that are affirming, and then there are progressive churches. There's not a lot of progressive churches in Nashville. I don't really know of a lot of other ones besides Grace Point that would be progressive from top to bottom. Here's what I mean. All affirming churches are not progressive with the rest of their theology.
Okay.
Some churches are pretty traditional with atonement theory or afterlife and all that sort of stuff. They're also affirming. Churches like Grace Point, all progressive churches will be affirming, but not all affirming churches will be progressive. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes.
So I don't know a lot of churches like Grace Point in the sense that communities that have done the work of sorting through all of this and saying, as a church, we feel like we are a progressive community.
Yeah.
And that entails, yes, that we're affirming of the LGBTQ plus community, but it also affirms a lot of other values as well.
Yep.
So we don't have, there's not a, I mean, to my knowledge, people are like, sometimes people are like, what if other churches in Nashville become progressive like Grace Point? I'm like, great.
Right.
That's good. Like, I'm celebrating that.
There's not a competition here.
Right. Like, no, like, we want to celebrate human flourishing wherever we find it.
Yeah. And I guess if you would, obviously what you believe as a church, you believe. And so if you believe that's right, and that's the good way to understand and interpret Scripture and to live your life, well, then you would, hopefully you would want everyone to believe that, right?
Well, the whole idea of any sort of competition at church level, like, it just makes me feel like I need a shower to even think about it.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Like, what are we ultimately doing here? If the whole goal is just to be cooler than the folks down the street, or come on.
I totally agree with that. I have a conversation with a former member of our church recently, and they're going somewhere else. And look, my initial response to that is not, "Oh, what went wrong? Like, how can we get you back immediately? Like, this is something has gone horribly wrong, right?" So, I mean, I think that if it's sort of our slice of the pie, and if someone leaves, we get less, and someone else gets more, if that's how we're looking at this, we're missing the entire point. I mean, there's so many people out there that haven't even, what I would consider, haven't even like heard the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which we would maybe interpret a little bit differently. But there's lots of people, right, that we can bring in and minister to and help them improve their lives and live their lives in a more whole and fashion that leads to better human flourishing. So we don't need to be so concerned about if people are moving around.
The only thing I'm concerned about is if somebody leaves and they're hurt.
Right.
I want to make that right.
Yes.
I don't necessarily want to convince them to come back, or if it's better for them to move on. But I think in that sense, I do want to make peace when there's peace that needs to be made.
I agree with that.
In a sense of competition, though, like, that's not what we're here to do.
Yes, I totally agree with that point as well. And it is a rabbit trail now. But yeah, if a whole lot of people are leaving, then you need to stop and say, I wonder why they're all leaving. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not just them. Maybe there's something we're doing that is. I agree with that. Do you ever wonder if we are currently at the beginning stages or well into a sexual revolution that may not like end well? Or do you see this revolution kind of that we're in it's heading in the right direction, and we just need to be more welcoming and affirming of the direction we're already headed? Like, do you have any concerns ever, like when you're at home or whatever, going to sleep or whatever?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I think that I think that in a community like ours, I hope we're giving people the ability and the tools to do is to learn to trust themselves and make decisions about who they are, and to be honest and feel like they can lean into who they are. The things I don't sleep at night over are things like about the ways we are as a Christian religion, the way we're harming people, or the way we're leaving the planet in disrepair, or what am I handing my kids, and what are they going to hand their kids? Like, those are the things that keep me up at night.
Sure. Yep.
And I feel like that those are things we can do something about. I mean, I know I'm a 7, so people assume I'm always an optimist. I try to be. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it seems like, are you serious? Like, as a species, how could we keep messing this up?
Right.
But in my most honest moments, I really am hopeful that, and I would love to see. I would love to see 2 billion Christians make the world a better place, a place of more inclusion and a place of more transformation and human flourishing. And I think it's possible.
Yeah. You're optimistic that way.
Yeah, I am.
I can appreciate that for sure. Well, thank you for coming by today, man.
Thank you.
I enjoyed this.
Me too.
Very much. I feel like I understand and have learned a lot more about progressive Christianity than I think I've ever known before. So I appreciate you sharing what you have. And by the way, thanks for trusting me on this. Like I mentioned in the email, look, I think we probably disagree about some things, but I made sure to mention that this is not an ambush, or, you know what I mean? We're not going to try to put you on the spot, because, I think we disagree about quite a lot, man. But I feel like I have learned more and I better understand your position, and I really appreciate that, man.
Well, we shared bourbon.
Exactly. What could go wrong? Anything else you want to talk about today, or anything you want to leave with the listeners as we close?
I think I left it all in the field.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And So you're virtual now, and if things turn around, do you have a home ready, or is that something you guys are working through?
That's something we're still working through.
Okay, yeah.
I'm hoping by January that we can at least say this is where we're going to be when we go back.
Yeah. Well, it's a good time to kind of be figuring out where you're going to meet back in person again while everyone's virtual.
Yeah.
Do you find the people are tired of virtual, or is that going fairly well?
I mean, yeah, I think everybody wants to see each other.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for us has been throughout, like when we went virtual, we were forced to start doing everything on stuff we were working on to try to get online.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, it's been really interesting to watch and figure out how do you pastor a community that's now not just within Nashville or this area. We have people all over the United States. We have people who have become very active in our community from Pennsylvania and South Dakota.
That's cool.
And we have people from Argentina. We have people from, we have had people join us from Europe. So it really has sort of, because there's not a lot of grace points in the world.
Yeah, okay.
You know? So people who've been looking for that are now, you know, we have one group of, one family who are from several different states, and they jump on Zoom and watch our gathering together on Sunday mornings from different states. And we had them send us a video in to introduce themselves to our community at large, because it really has shifted us from being this community in Nashville to a community in the U.S. and even global.
Yep.
And so as we factor where we go, these folks, because when I get emails, like the usual email is, hey, love what you're doing. Is this going to stop when you guys go back in person again? Because there's sort of, people are, you know, you get attached.
Of course,
and
yeah.
then is this going to, so our commitment is to make sure we're still offering this.
Yeah. Love that. Josh Scott, thanks for coming by, brother.
Thanks so much for
having me. Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
You bet.